Hi, how you doing? Good afternoon, good night, good evening, good morning, wherever you're listening from. This is Canute Exploration. I am still on the teach a bit, learn a bit segment here. Look, I'm going to be talking about a particular topic, but I need to establish something, clarify something here. I'm going to be looking at adaptive leadership from an empirical perspective. However, it's my research, I've done that research, but I'm going to be clarifying the difference between two categories of high schools in Jamaica, perhaps around within the Caribbean region as well and elsewhere around the world, who knows. But we have the non-traditional high schools and the traditional high schools back in Jamaica. Okay, let's start with the non-traditional high schools. The non-traditional high schools are those high schools that were upgraded from the secondary school. There was a category called the secondary schools, right? Back then, the secondary schools, students from the primary schools, elementary, I think, in the United States, where I'm streaming from, in Miramar, Florida, I'm Dr. Canute White. The secondary schools, student would not need to pass a an external exam to go into those schools back then. But for the traditional high schools back then, you would need to pass an exam to enter those schools. Big name schools. And I went to one of those schools at North Street. And yeah, the lighter side of North Street, St. George's College. Hey, but I went there. But the non-traditional high schools are those secondary schools. As I said, those secondary schools, you didn't have to pass an external exam to go to those schools. They're naturally they're attracting the students who are not extremely bright, are not bright, so to speak, but they are good at sort of a vocational skill set. They would be good at that. The carpentry and the plumbing and do a little thing. Yeah. But eventually those schools were upgraded to what we now call non-traditional high schools. And they're doing well now. I was the dean of discipline at one of those schools, and hey, those guys are bright, extremely bright. So they are doing well now. There's a sort of change in terms of the culture, the context of those schools, with those secondary schools, which are now non-traditional high schools. And they have been doing well. You have persons who have gone to universities and become doctors, lawyers, psychologists, teachers, and what. But they have done well now because things have stepped up. So these are the non-traditional high schools, upgraded from secondary schools. Naturally, the traditional high schools were those schools that were always up there, students doing well, extremely well. Those were the students who we expected to matriculate into the university system and become professionals. Well, talking about back then, now the non-traditional high school also graduated those students, but but those were the traditional high school back then. Right. So when I talk about non-traditional high schools, those secondary schools that are now upgraded to high schools, and the traditional high schools are those high schools that were always high schools from way back when. So let me make that clarification before I go into my research that I'd like to talk a bit about, looking at the traditional, non-traditional high school as it relates to the teachers' perceptions of adaptive leadership, practices of principals in Jamaican high schools. And this was done last year. It was completed last year, this study. I stayed here in Florida, and actually collect data, engage my participants in Jamaica, and it was an extremely exciting experience for me and my participants. And I'm just going to be sharing this experience with you, this research with you, as I go by, for the next couple of minutes. So let's conceptualize this thing about adaptive leadership. It's important that I do that. So adaptive leadership is really the practice of mobilizing individuals, people, to tackle tough challenges, and it's basically adjusting their unrealistic expectations rather than try to satisfy them as if the situation were amendable primarily by technical remedies, right? So it's not about looking in the book and yeah, we get this straight, right? We have to look at in terms of adaptive leadership, the leaders in organizations, in the school system, have to consider the going outside of the box, and be more critical in their thinking, solving problem solving skills. And adaptive leadership principles also facilitate change response in environmental challenges. So, as an adaptive leader, you ensure that the persons who follow you, the persons in the organization, in the schools, are able to respond to environmental challenges that are sometimes unexpected, but they're ready to deal with it. And this thing about adaptive leadership, you have to understand that the dynamics of environment also plays into it, because an environment that is changing constantly, and as such creates situation that forces the institution, the organization, and its leaders to constantly change with it. So that speaks to this whole thing about adaptive leadership in organizations, in institutions. So as we continue to conceptualize adaptive leadership, we also look at adaptive leaders as engaging followers in identifying the most important elements, the most important context of the organization, of the school, to preserve those elements, you know, that that basically encompasses the heritage of the organization, preserve them, right? And use those elements to facilitate growth within the organizations. Adaptive leadership also speaks to improvisation, because as you lead, you are, as an adaptive leader, you have to consider improvising, because as things change in in the environment, you have to know improvise to ensure that the organization, the schools, the workplace continue to to operate, be through improvising, and therefore you have to be an adaptive leader to appreciate that. So adaptive leadership also allows leaders to build a culture where diversity, diverse views that is, are relevant without the reliance on central planning or the genius of a few persons within the management team. So it encompasses a great deal of stakeholders, stakeholder membership in terms of the decision making process, and not just the persons in the upper echelon, as I have understood, uh, in relation to the elite theory of policy making, where those persons who are up there in the higher echelon make the decision. But no, adaptive leadership would not mesh with the elite theory of policy making. because those the adaptive leadership principle suggests that you encompass those persons who are relevant to the organization, to the institution, listen to them. And it's critical that that happens within the organization. Also, adaptive leadership may just ask for the recognition of persons, right? So recognize individuals who in the organization, in the schools, who feel like they're incompetent, they feel betrayed, are irrelevant because they are seen persons coming in and doing things. So bring them into the fold, talk to them, see what they can contribute to the development of the organization as an adaptive leader. If you're not an adaptive leader, start adapting the principles of adaptive leadership and see how best you can do that. Because you would have to rearrange, right, during the adaptive leadership process so as to help them, those who feel incompetent, accept the benefit of exploration, right? And not necessarily exploitation, just doing the thing that as you usually do, but being innovative exploration, right? Feel competent. You want them to feel competent through other means and participate in the way forward. So bring them into the fold as an adaptive leader. I am Dr. Canute White, and I had done this research looking at teachers' perception of principals' adaptive leadership practices in two categories of Jamaican high schools. I had done this last year, 2021. In fact, March 2021, I've completed this study. So again, conceptualizing adaptive leadership. So technical changes requires the act of fixing problems that exist within the system, right? However, there is a different perspective, right, in relation to technical leadership and adaptive leadership. There's a difference there. Look, technical leaders focus on problem solving are first order changes within existing structures and paradigms. So they stay with things and let us do it this way, we can fix it this way, this is how we can fix it, this is the other. So it's sort of a reductionist approach. And reductionist here meaning we reduce our problem solving choices to just a few or one elements, and not thinking out of the box, not exploring. So you have reductionist incidentally those persons who think that okay, we're still having the virus, the coronavirus, even though we take the vaccine. That's a reductionist approach to dealing with it, right? Because they're hesitant because of that. Hey, we still can't get it, so why taking the vaccine? Reductionist approach. They're not thinking outside of the box, looking at other logical reasons for taking the vaccine. and let me tell you, it will reduce your symptoms and reduce your chances of dying. Anyway, let's go back. So that's a sort of a technical leadership approach. But the adaptive leader now will look at other things involve deep or second order changes that alter existing values and norms in the organization. Statement of the problem. The statement of the problem is very outshining. You will see it. It's a truism, as we say, because in Jamaica and many places around the world, there are social changes, there are cultural changes that take place, subcultural changes, and therefore Jamaican high schools, colleges would be forced to interact with social and cultural changes as the environment becomes more sensitive and challenges. This initiative requires a principal, a leader, a boss, a manager, a CEO who would focus on preparing individuals to change in response to these environmental challenges. So now, principals may ignore adaptive challenges, leaders may ignore adaptive challenges, and continue to lead through technical leadership. Yeah. However, they have to understand that this would create dysfunction within the organization, within the school, within the colleges, and affect the operations. So, adaptive leadership should be employed to support institutional growth. As the environment changes and changes emerge, change initiatives are to be developed by high schools, organizations in order in order for them to survive. Can the non-traditional high school survive? Can the traditional high school survive? Or which one of these schools are more able, more capable of surviving challenges, external challenges, adaptive challenges? The initial stage of this initiative should be the mobilization of teachers, organization in general, workers, followers, mobilization of lecturers in universities to deal with challenges. The purpose of the study. The purpose of this qualitative case study was to explore and compare constraints and enablers in the use of adaptive leadership to motivate and mobilize teachers in response to environmental adaptive changes, challenges from the perspective or from the perception of teachers at two categories of Jamaican high schools, namely traditional and non-traditional high schools. The main objective for exploring constraints and enablers in the use of adaptive leadership at the schools was to identify and understand the various functions, factors that may prevent or facilitate adaptive leadership practices in these institutions. Research questions. There are three research questions in my study. One, to what extent are teachers motivated and mobilized in response to environmental adaptive challenges, changes experienced by the institutions? What are the constraints and enablers faced by the principals in the effort to motivate and mobilize teachers in response to environmental adaptive changes experienced by the institution? And finally, the research question, what are the indicators that adaptive leadership practices are being used in the institutions under study? How relevant is this study? I'm Dr. Canute White, and you're listening to Learn a Bit Canute Exploration, looking at a very important study, the perception of teachers, based, in relation to the leadership style, adaptive leadership practices of the principals in two Jamaican high schools, categories of Jamaican high schools. So, administrators need to explore, understand, and employ leadership strategies in order to assure sufficient preparation in response to environmental changes. So that's one. This study becomes relevant because there is a need for understanding strategies that will enable schools, to be efficient in preparing for external challenges. Secondly, the issue of policy information through the Ministry of Education in Jamaica and other ministries based on the context of this study could also be informed by the study. Principals could understand the environmental challenges of their schools to effectively practice adaptive leadership. This study will facilitate that. We need to study things like these in order to facilitate that. However, the literature on adaptive leadership in educational institutions are limited, especially as it applies to secondary educational institutions in the Caribbean. So therefore, this was a relevant study, still is relevant study, as it can be replicated in universities and in other countries around the world. Rationale of the study. Schools, colleges have been affected by adaptive challenges, just like your organization, which inherently affects the operations of the organization of your school and colleges. It also affects your organization growth, institutional growth. Educational entities in Jamaica and around the world have to take a unique approach to the concept of adaptive leadership based on the context of its local reality. What's the reality of your institution? What the reality of your organization? In any case, you have to take some initiative, adaptive leadership approach in order to deal with your reality when it comes to challenges, external or internal challenges within the organization. What are the objectives of the study? The objective of my study really to facilitate an understanding of the usefulness of adaptive leadership in the high school system, college system, in organizations as well, to an extension. And understanding of the differences, if any, of the outcomes after employing adaptive leadership principle. Does it make the students more attentive? Does it make the academic performance of the students? Does it enhance the academic performance of the students? Let me say it like that, right? So, what's the result of adaptive leadership? Does it make your school become top school within the system? Yeah, and good performing school, because we know in Jamaica there's always an assessment of schools in terms of performance, and many schools have performed poorly overall, and perhaps adaptive leadership would have enhanced their performance. It's also about creating knowledge of the diverse external and internal challenges facing each category of high schools in Jamaica, the non-traditional and the traditional high schools. Also, another objective of my study is to understand how environmental challenges affects institutional growth, and also to understand the approach taken by each category of high schools in responding and preparing to respond to environmental changes. What the literature has to say. Miller 2015 presented the fact about environmental changes experienced by schools in the rural parts of Jamaica, and the critical role played by principals in ensuring institutional growth through adaptive challenges. So Miller explored that adaptive challenges situation in the rural part of Jamaica. Schools in the rural parts of Jamaica, as you would have had challenges as it relates to resources, and even external challenges, community um, um, impossibilities and limitations. So other researchers suggested that teachers' perception of the principal's leadership practices can affect the teacher's performance. And this is what this research is mainly about, how teachers view that. And so we see the leadership style of principals or the practices, the adaptive practices, leadership practices of principals through the eyes of teachers in this studies. Also, Hardman 2011 found that the principal's leadership style may influence school capacity and the student learning gains, as we talk about what is the outcome, what could be the outcome of adaptive leadership. Literature also agreed that there was a challenge regarding school leadership and student academic performance. Also in the literature, this whole challenge between the leadership style of principals and the students' academic performance caused mainly by the deficiency in leadership competence, which eventually attributed to poor classroom instructions and indiscipline among teachers and the students. Because, look, if the leadership is poor within the organization, within the schools, so to speak, yeah, within the schools, the the teachers will not perform up at an optimum level, and it simply means that the students will be affected. So it's like a domino effect. So we have to consider that, we have to bear that in mind. And the RAND change agent study, very famous study, implies that to ensure successful change responses in schools, there should be belief and the commitment to change practices, the effectiveness of external environmental agents interacting with internal settings, and consideration of teachers' realities, which is important in the adaptive leadership perspective, the adaptive leadership practices of leaders, school leaders. Thompson agreed that the leadership was a significant variable in the development of schools and dictated the school's performance. So Thompson said that, hey, look, school leadership affects the performance of schools. Always remember that. As we talk another time about organizational culture, the culture of organization is ingrained into the culture of the leadership. So leadership dictates the culture of the organization. However, the researcher Thompson, 2012, revealed the 2015 report from Jamaica's National Educational Inspectorate, MEI, that school leadership was unsatisfactory in 38% of the school inspected. So we'll talk about that. So if the school leaderships are unsatisfactory, it means that those schools' performance will be affected, and therefore Jamaican high schools and high school in the region and around the world, schools in general, even businesses, need to consider the leadership as it relates to the growth of the organization. Thompson also acknowledged that the Jamaican authorities' effort to prepare school leaders and the recognition of the importance of leadership in the school's performance. So he recognized that Jamaican authorities try, and I was in the Jamaican school system as Dean of Discipline and Director of Behavioral Management and Safety at the community college system as well. And I realized the effort that the Jamaican authority, educational authority, placed in trying to get these schools up to par. But the leadership are sometimes the problem within these institutions. So he suggested, Thompson 2017 suggested that there was no decision regarding the leadership qualities required from principals, and that's something that need to be focused on as well, and it's important that the authorities at the government levels look at what is really required from principals. Yeah, we're doing all these inspections of schools. I have engaged in some of these inspections as a leader in one of these high schools, and I understand the whole principle of it. I was privy to some of the challenges that other high schools were having because I was a dean of discipline and I was also the president of the Dean of Discipline Association, which I was instrumental in establishing, and I hear it's running well now back in Jamaica. I must, hats off to Joseph Aaron and the other deans, former deans who have contributed. And so we have engaged in this whole issue of school performance and the inspectorate intervention and so on. But look, I'm Dr. Canute White. I have a book on Amazon called Adaptive School Leadership, School Leaders Connecting with the Environment. And on Amazon, you can get it at this time when I am talking to you, March 2022. It's about $33 on Amazon. It's a good read. It details what I've been saying to you and what I will be saying. So it's really a detailed um, presentation of this lecture, of this study in a book form. Get it. It's good for textbook as well for student teachers in teachers as well, and principals. Good read, good for the library, in the schools for students to look at. Good for the libraries in colleges around the world to look at and understand adaptive leadership as it is applicable to the school system. It's good for leaders, managers, CEO to have on the bookshelf, in the office, in the boardroom, so that you can also read and understand the whole concept of adaptive leadership within the organization. I'm Dr. Canute White. Continue to look at adaptive leadership in the high school, looking at two different categories of Jamaican high school, non-traditional and traditional high school, as it relates to adaptive leadership, present practices in these categories of high school. So I've collected data through interview protocol, and yeah, I use Zoom, the Zoom video conferencing technology, because this research was done during a pandemic. Approximately 12 teachers and 6 administrators from both schools were interviewed, participated. The data were scanned for appropriate descriptions, assertion, and themes through detailed analysis, as Cresswell 2013 would have suggested. As explained in the invitation and consent letter, that I'd done that. These letters were emailed to the participants. Yeah, the risk involved also was a part of the letter, telling them what were the risks and the benefits and so on. The whole thing about research, and I would have understood the challenges that involved there. Convenience sampling, most commonly used in behavioral and educational studies. This study that I had done was, well, behavioral and educational study. I think it's a twin. And traditional high school and a non-traditional high school in Kingston were used as cases for this study. 30 minutes for each interview. Informed consent, as I had said, was emailed beforehand. Findings. I look at the findings hot and narrowly, and then I look at the general findings, because the general findings would basically summarize the three research questions, the findings for the three research questions. But let's look at the findings as it's related to the identification of external and internal challenges for both categories of high schools. Okay, for the external challenges, the non-traditional high school. During the interview, we have identified external challenges for the non-traditional high school as poverty, community crime and disputes, digital age that facilitates knowledge, economic conditions faced by teachers, lack of parental support, regular dance hall attendance by some students at this non-traditional high school. And for the traditional high school, lack of parental support, gross societal indiscipline, homosexuality, home challenges, issues, community socialization, and unacceptable parental behavior. So these are coming from the participants. These are what we gathered from the participants in terms of the external challenges faced by these categories of high school in Kingston, Jamaica. For the internal challenges for these two categories of high school, we have identified one for the non-traditional high school. We have identified, as it relates to internal challenges, learning disability among students, teachers' inability to deal with learning disability, teachers' inability to deal with these learning disabilities that they identify internally, and the constant lateness of students. We're talking about the non-traditional high school now, internal challenges, intra-staff conflict, staff fighting, having, malicious conflict and so on. Communication issues among staff, not talking about operational stuff, not communicating. Lack of resources from government not providing enough stuff. And for the traditional high school, in terms of internal challenges, I have identified in my research students selling in the classroom, in school in general, and school compound. For the research, but I saw that happen in non-traditional as well. Um, in a bit, sorry, inadequate government resources, that comes back. Inadequate instructional resources, teachers not readily accepting changes, personal issues with colleagues, teachers' concerns about leadership, financial constraint by the institution, inadequate training in behavioral challenges, issues, and inefficiencies in teachers' teaching learning process. So that is the internal challenge for the traditional high school that I've just read. Let's piggyback on some of them in terms of giving you quotations, the quotes by some of these participants. So it's a qualitative study, you understand? So spice it up with something. For the internal challenges, right? One of the internal challenges, the non-traditional high school, they talk about lack of resources. One person said, there's nobody that is looking at it. Where the government is expecting you to perform, the ministry is expecting you to perform. Many of them don't even give you any of the resources that you need to perform, but you are expected to perform just like the other schools who have gotten everything. So the non-traditional high school is one of the participants that said that apparently the other schools referred to the traditional high schools that this participant believe had gotten anything they wanted. Okay, so internal challenges. One of them, and it relates to the traditional high school, personal issue. One of the internal challenges. One participant from the traditional high school said, in addition to the leadership style with administration, people also have issues with the middle managers. They have issues with them, colleagues, and of course, that will affect how we perform in the day-to-day activity of the school. So we talk about performance as it relates to the whole adaptive leadership thing, or lack of. So internal challenges, non-traditional high school, teachers inability to deal with learning disability of students. It was stated by a participant that some students were more theoretical based, and as such, the teachers have to be focusing on the theory instead of practical so that they can get some learning taking place. That was what was said. While this may not be a result of their clinical learning disability, one participant believed that, and I quote, they lack creativity. They don't want to use their brain. They don't want to use things around them to generate their ideas. They just want to tell them, they want you to tell them everything. That is where I am having a great challenge. So this is a research that I have done. I'm Dr. Canute White on adaptive leadership in Jamaican high schools, looking at two categories of Jamaican high school, done traditional high school and the traditional high school. I did this research just last year during the pandemic. Um, March 2021, the research was completed. So, internal challenge in traditional high school as it relates to leadership, I quote from a participant. I think sometimes you see there is no agreement in terms of how leadership may approach a situation versus how the teaching staff may decide to approach a situation. Okay, so let's look at research question one, then I will go into the general findings. Look at research question one findings, and then I'll go into the general findings, looking at all three questions, you know, summarizing the findings for all three questions. But let's look at research question one. Research question one states, to what extent are teachers motivated and mobilized in response to environmental adaptive challenges? That's the research question that I'll be looking at for a while. And the non-traditional high school situation, listen to this. Some teachers take the easy way out in response to challenges based on lack of mobilization from some leaders. I quote from a participant. Because more time when the problems arise, and we try to go through the channel, the persons who are in leadership, they throw up their hands in the air too. So you try to see how you can work it out. Still on research question one, the non-traditional high school situation, still on that. Most leaders will not in the state of readiness, most leaders are not in the state of readiness to mobilize the teachers. And as it was expressed by one participant, some of the middle managers often suggest that the teachers, I quote, just work with the program. Okay. The teachers are not adequately mobilized in response to, and this is now the traditional high school situation as it relates to research question one. Some teachers are not adequately mobilized in response to environmental changes and the challenges. However, a number of efforts were made in this regard. And I quote from a participant. Well, leadership, I should say, is identifying talent among the staff. Our areas of strength, our areas of study that could help in different areas. So they are not just focusing on academics because they have classes for e-learning and so on, but they also focus on social. Persons who have done their education and training in social sciences and so on, they are mobilized in a team of persons like disciplinary committee. I do see attempts to identify talents within the organization and use them where we can help. So that was a participant from the non, from the traditional high school, as it relates to mobilizing and motivating teachers. From the traditional high school again, the same research question. Leadership facilitates a level of preparedness, which would enable the institution capacity to strive as well as the teachers' capacity to strive in a changing environment. I quote from a participant now. We said like five, we offset the cost for five teachers to do special education. A lot of teachers said that they want to do it, but the reason was funding. So we dipped in the resources and sent five teachers there so they would come back and help with the slow learners. That was from a participant in the traditional high school situation as it relates to motivating and mobilizing in response to environmental adaptive challenges. So they also in the traditional high school, teachers were used by the institution to teach other teachers from the institution about special education, as seen from the leader's lens. One participant also stated that in terms of the problem they face in the classroom, the main one would have been the teaching, learning, and we focus on it. So you find that these are some of the things that comes out. Let me look quickly on the main the overall findings. So the overall finding that relates to research question one, two, and three. So for research question one, teachers the findings, teachers mobilization in the non-traditional teachers mobilization in the non-traditional high school was not practical because of principals and unpreparedness, and teachers were not adequately mobilized in the traditional high school. Also found, I also found that trust and resistance to change were among the constraints to mobilization in the non-traditional high school. Appreciative gestures were enablers in non-traditional high school, while trust issues and the teacher's personality were constrained in the traditional high school, with practices of appreciation and charismatic leadership being among its enablers. And also found that motivation from limited motivation was limited in non-traditional high school. Motivation was limited in non-traditional high school because of teachers' dissatisfaction and absenteeism. But monetary motivation was more important in the traditional high school. It is likely that the traditional high school would have less difficulty executing adaptive leadership than the non-traditional high school based on my study. What participants said about adaptive leadership, their perspective of it. From the traditional high school, adaptive leadership basically has to do with, and I am going to say this, how the leadership style of teachers and administrators help not only the teachers to adapt to the changes on the inside of school, but adapt to changes imposed on the school life, external forces, as well as how the leadership style of the teachers will help the students to adapt to the changes inside the school, as well as the forces that are external to the students. Those are the things I understand by the adaptive leadership. That's a participant from the traditional high school. And from the non traditional high school, a participant view of adaptive leadership. I quote, as you were looking at adaptive leadership, in my own way, I see adaptive leadership as the way to go because there is no one leadership style that is going to work in any situation. You have to look at what best suit the situation that you are in. We talk about the school reality, local reality, and you have to change to fit the situation. For you to be an adaptive person, according to the participants from the non-traditional high school, so you can know the psychology, you know when to strike the iron and when to step back and do a rethinking and come again. Interesting perspective from a participant of non-traditional high school. So in conclusion, no extensive policy-oriented practice of adaptive leadership in either of the institution, as the leadership style practice was not considered or named by any of the participants as adaptive leadership. They were responsive, they would like to see it happen. However, elements of adaptive leadership apparently exist in both schools, but there's a need to be for it to be identified and institutionalized, hence become named and a learned practice with shared vision as these organizations move forward. Conclusion also, based on evidence, it is highly likely that the traditional high school would have less difficulty executing the concept of adaptive leadership as it has fewer constraints than the non-traditional high school. Attempt to mobilize teachers are apparently different in both categories of high school in Jamaica, and as such, it may also be concluded that the traditional high school is more likely to grow and develop in challenging environment than the non-traditional high school. General recommendation from the participant: school leaders need to be trained in behavioral sciences. Leaders should build on the individual and institutional competence, human resources, most capable in dealing with specific challenges at specific periods despite their position in the institution. The participants also recommend that leaders should find out what motivates each teacher, motivate them to respond to challenges, choose the adaptive leadership process, and those who respond favorably to the motivation process should be given power and used to assist in the motivation of the others. In other words, use their motivated peers to assist in the motivation effort. Leaders should place more focus on identifying the strengths of teachers, place them in a group that can assist in challenging area of academic and behavior. They also said that leaders should highlight the achievement of teachers through expression of appreciation. In other words, do not only issue memos when teachers' infractions occur, but issue tokens of praise when good things happen. They also believe in the recommendation that conduct staff developmental activities should be conducted at the middle of the school year when the students are familiar with the teachers and the teaching style. They also believe that teachers should be consulted with a view to try some of the solutions that the teachers have, the ideas that the teachers have, and therefore leaders should listen and take advice as well as be prepared to revamp ideas and programs that are not working as observed after implementation. So those were some of the recommendations from the participants at the two schools. I combined those recommendations in my research. And my personal recommendations: the leadership should conduct a professional SWOT analysis once every 2 years, right? Jones 2005 considers SWOT analysis and as sorry as important to high schools as it help in the identification of strategic opportunities. sorry, opportunities, and provides ideas on how to avoid institutional weaknesses and external threats. The institution leadership should find ways to enhance the organization's trust level, especially between teachers and leadership. This could be done through seminars, regular socials, yeah, and they should also conduct occasional interviews through random selection with students in order to identify new challenges and generate solutions for emerging environmental challenges from students' perspective. perspective. Bigger managers such as HOD and the supervisors need to convene a meeting, identify emerging challenges, and make solutions within the context of the department and the grade level. And they should have periodical developmental meetings, seminars in the context of the whole department and grade level. Critical. If you have any question, send it to wradio668 at gmail.com. Remember, hey, subscribe now. Share this with your friends. Tell them to subscribe. Canute Exploration, your topic in the podcast, is an interesting podcast platform. So work with it, please. And Canute Media is the YouTube channel. Tell your friends about it. You can, you may request copies of the reference list. I will send it to you if you email me at wradio668 at gmail.com, anywhere in the world you are. And you may also purchase that book, yeah, at Amazon, or you can order through me. And I am happy that you have joined me for this presentation of my research. And I am hoping that you continue to watch my episodes on Canute Exploration, your topic in the podcast, and we lecture sometime, teach a bit, and we do the traditional interviews with guests from all over the world. I am Dr. Canute White, and I will see you again. Take care and bye bye.